Where am I? What happened? I feel really odd. Oh my God, I passed out in a crop circle. How long have I been here? What are those beams of light in the sky? I've never seen them before. Feels like they're watching me. Feels kinda good. The beams of light moved around the field into every nook and cranny. They were moving carefully all over the field like they were doing a job or something. So what is this pattern I'm sitting in? What's the crop circle message? On the ground, all I see are triangles and cubes, but the electromagnetic energy is definitely enhanced. I've got goosebumps all over my body from head to toe. The top of my head is tingling. I feel dizzy, looking around like I'm spinning in a vortex, a tornado of blended, enhanced frequencies. I understand. This must be crop circle magic. Six months after I was in that crop circle, I made a full feature film with no training or experience whatsoever. 6 months after that, I made movie 2. And in the course of 2 years, I made 4 full feature films in record time through a telepathic communication with whoever these circle makers are. They would awaken me at 3 in the morning, night after night after night, and there were nights when I was almost not willing to get up and start writing, but they didn't let me sleep. It was a relentless mission where they were gifting me an awful lot of crop circle wisdom in a very short period of time. After looking at thousands of crop circles over the years, I started to realize some correlations and consistencies that were always recognizable. Many of the sacred geometric crop circles, when spun, show us propulsion technologies, most likely spaceship propulsion. I was speaking at an event in Michigan, and it was an event wrapped around a lake with a lot of psychics and healers, and there were tents everywhere. And at the end of the first day, a gentleman came up to me and said, "There's somebody you need to meet. Are you willing to take a drive with me about a half hour from here?" I didn't go that night because I had to speak first thing in the morning, but I did go the next night. So he takes me for this drive in the middle of nowhere to meet this woman named Penny Kelly, who had written all these books. And we're having a nice 4 hours around the round table, eating cherries and gabbing away about things that were interesting but not mind-boggling. So it's 2:30 in the morning, and I said, "Boy, I'm really sorry, but you're gonna have to take me back to the hotel because I've got to speak first thing in the morning." So she hands me a book, and I said, "Well, I brought you one of my movies." So we did this trade, and I went through the pages, and I said, "Oh my God, crop circle nodes, what are they doing in your book?" And she looks at the gentleman and she says, "You didn't tell her who I am?" And he went, I said, "Who are you?" She said, I'm the real partner that worked with the scientist, William Levengood, for the last 15 years of his life. She said, next month is Levengood's wake. He died last year, so we're going to do a wake. It's going to be beautiful at the lab, at the farm. And so I said, absolutely, I'll be back. What an honor, thank you. So Stan takes me back to the hotel. It's a little after 2:30 in the morning, and I'm watching these two women watch me walk up to the door. He dropped me at the front. He did a big loop of the parking lot. And as I entered, I'm watching these two girls laughing. And I said, what's so funny? And she said, the man next to you. And I said, I'm sorry? She said, there's a very tall man walking up with you. He's got a silver goatee and silver hair. Do you know who he is? And I said, I have no idea. She said, well, he has a message. Can I give it to you? And I said, sure. She said, he wants you to know that he orchestrated this and he's really glad it worked. I said, hold on, I'll be right back. And I ran through the parking lot, and he caught me in the rear view, backed up, and I said, what did William Levengood look like? And he said, tall, silver goatee, silver hair, why? And I said, oh my God, guess what just happened? He's here. He orchestrated this, and he told those ladies to tell me.
I first met Dr. William Levengood in maybe 1996, 97, when he wrote or read a book that I wrote, and it was about Kundalini, and he was looking for people who had unusual energies. And so he invited me to the lab, and I thought about it for quite a while before I called him and said, okay, I'll come over. I never really said anything about being in the lab. A number of people have asked me, how come we never heard of you before? And the reason is because that it wasn't about me. It was about the science. It was about the work, the amazing work that he was doing. And he was under great pressure at that time. He had been researching crop circles since about probably 1989. So it had been about 8 years, and he had, he had quite a bit of evidence that he had compiled. And he was trying to put that all together. And I came into the scene, and my thing was consciousness. His was science, and we just kind of hit it off.
When I came back a month later, I stayed at the farm where Levengood did all the outdoor research on crop circles. And the very first night I was at the farm, I lay down in my bed, and I saw him walk through the door, silver hair, silver goatee, came right up to me in the bed, and luckily nothing scares me. And I just looked at him and I said, I know who you are. And he said, I'm so glad you're here. And I did orchestrate this. And that was how I met William Levengood.
I think Lefty brought us together, Dr. Levengood, because Patty had a camera and a story to tell, and I had some data and a story to tell. And I think that it was just one of those miracles in which two people are brought together because they have something to do together. And Patty took a risk and, drove off with a strange man to my place, my farm, and spent the next few hours talking. And it wasn't really until she got up to leave that the whole story about Levengood came out, and the fact that I had been a partner with him in the lab for probably close to 15 years. Levengood stayed with me for a couple of months after he died. He made all kinds of racket. The important thing is that people from the other side, what we call the other side, people who have already left here, aren't necessarily done here. And they continue to work and to facilitate things that they feel are important. There's a huge number of people that are working to repair, restore, and regenerate our world, because right now the old systems are coming apart and there's new ones coming together. And they are very active in that process.
So I finished my first movie, And I couldn't believe how easy it was. It was almost effortless. So we started to head out to the deck, and I looked over my shoulder and I said, "Whoa, there's a blue orb on the monitor." And he came back in and he looked and he said, "Patty, that monitor's unplugged from the wall." And I looked at the blue orb and I said, "That's not even an orb in the movie." And all of a sudden, the hair went up on my arms. Goosebumps, chills. I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in a crop circle. And he could see the hair standing up on my arms and the goosebumps, and I said, they're in the house. And that was the first time I realized that they were with me. It was very, very blatant that it was something from another world that was in the house. And the poor editor looked at me and he goes, "You look weird." And I said, I feel weird. Turn the gear back on.
When anyone sees or feels or hears a communication coming from another dimension, quite often there will be some ball of light that accompanies that. You may notice it, you may not. Very often a blue ball of light actually indicates that truth, that there's a truth being spoken or being worked with or being dealt with or being communicated.
I said, "Show me the Oliver's Castle footage where 2 balls of light lay a crop circle down in seconds. Show it to me again." He said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know, just do it." So he lit it up and I watched it and I said, "Reverse it." He said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know, just do it." So he reversed it. We watched it. The chills came back and I said, "Slow it down." He said, "How slow?" I said, "I don't know, 30%. And we both looked at each other like, where did that number come from? Why did I say that? I said, "I don't know, just do it."
It's not what you see.
When I first looked at this picture, I did not know anything about Oliver's Castle. I just saw 2 balls of plasma communicating with one another. And it was just that simple. They are the, the balls of plasma, or the light at the bottom of those vortices that are creating the crop circle. When Patty reversed it or slowed it down, she actually revealed the communication, which is instantaneous. When you have plasma communicates almost instantly. It travels immediately everywhere, and that's just one of the features of plasma. So what you're seeing here is basically Oliver's Castle is being laid down, and that pattern that showed up is a result of that black and white bar between those 2 plasma balls. That contains the pattern. They're telling one another what they're doing, what each one is doing.
Well, I feel really lucky that I've been able to have all this equipment at my disposal for over 20 years now to investigate pictures about claims of the paranormal. One of the other interesting photographic analysis cases that I worked on was in 1996 was the Oliver's Castle situation, where a group of people were manning cameras on hilltops, and one particular controversial person videotaped a crop circle being formed by orbs of light. Following day, for reasons that were important to him, he passed on the tape to other people and then vanished, and the tape became controversial because of the way he had handled it. But in truth, there was a crop circle there. literally the same morning as when he showed up with the videotape. And I analyzed that videotape. And I found it to be quite astounding that the property of the lights, the orbs, once again, similar, if not identical, to what we found in the Phoenix lights a year later. But here we have these 3 lights flying over a field that it's not just forming a crop circle. In analyzing it frame by frame, there are ripples that are moving out like throwing a rock in a pond. As the ripples are turning and develop spokes that are moving backwards, like a wagon wheel. You know, you look at a covered wagon and it's going forward, but the wheels start to look like they're going backwards. It's ripples going outward as there's spokes that are turning backwards and forwards, and then quickly moves back in, and whoosh, there's the pattern. The computer knows, and I know what's true. I know that this is not something that was faked. It was not something that was a mistake. It's not something that's an accident. It's something really incredible.
The blue sphere on the monitor, that's like a piece of equipment being used to communicate that says, come back here. We have something to tell you, we have something to share, we have something to show you. And I think at that moment, when you really acknowledge those kinds of energies, you enter into a slightly altered state in which you just do something that you're not doing logically. You're discovering something that's not logical. You're just on pure intuition, and that intuition pays off if you honor it. And Patty honored it, and what she saw was the communication link between those 2 plasma vortices. We were, really refining the whole theory around crop circles. And it just struck me that what he was doing needed to be known, needed to be written about, needed to be understood by the population, the greater population, because it was so important. It was information that was moving us into a new paradigm.
and given some samples from a formation in Colts Neck, New Jersey. And it indicated that there were two counter-rotating vortices that were interacting with one another as they formed that formation. And there's all kinds of scientific information that is known by scientists about the mathematics and the distribution of material moving through a vortex. It's going to come down the vortex, and then it's going to kind of like splay out. Now, if you've got double interacting vortices, you're going to have these two vortices throwing material in a particular direction. And what Lefty did was had the people who did the sampling of that crop circle go back to that crop circle several times and keep going further and keep going further. And what he discovered was that the distribution of the particles, and he was tracking, I think, I forget what exactly he was tracking. I think it might have been iron ore in the soil. He found that distribution exactly matched the mathematical formulas for, a rotating vortex, counter-rotating vortices, and the way that they throw material out there. And so he was at that point pretty convinced that the vortex was the form, or was the active action that was happening to create a crop circle. And then we went on from there to work with a few other things. We discovered it was plasma by doing some experiments using a little piece of plant, and you wave a magnet in front of it, or you move the magnet up and down, and you get certain results. And it matched the results of a plasma. And so it came to be finally that he said this is a charge density plasma, and it's a plasma vortex.
In 2010, when I met Stephen Greer in the center of a crop circle, he was holding two compasses, and one was pointing north that way, and the other was pointing north in the opposite direction. And I realized when I saw the sketch that Levengood had done of the counter-rotating vortices that it absolutely made sense.
Then he began to realize that sometimes the effects of the crop circle were very helpful. Sometimes they were very destructive. Sometimes they were just disorderly. And so he began to theorize that within this plasma vortex, there were a number of energies that were operating. There were electrical fields, there were electromagnetic energies, there were ion electron avalanches, there were areas of convective stability where the thing was just very firm and stable. Or very coherent and stable. There were other areas that were chaotic. There were microwave energies, and when the plant was hit with a crop circle that was mainly microwaves, it was pretty much injured. The microwaves were very injurious. And so he eventually put together this theory that said within this these counter-rotating vortices, there's this whole stack of interactive energies, each with very distinct boundary conditions. So eventually then, he began to notice that all the crop circles from the United States had a much more powerful charge than the crop circles from England or Holland or Europe or anywhere else in the world, South America. And he realized that that was because the energies moving across the U.S., we had this whole plains area, the Great Plains, in the middle of the country, and that allowed for, with no mountains and not a whole lot of obstruction, that allowed for the wind to boost the electrical currents in the earth. And that then it became clear at that point that the crop circles in the U.S., which often involved corn, you have to have some very strong crop circles in order to take a corn plant down, because they're very sturdy, much heavier than wheat or oats or any of those other greens. And so he began to realize that the earth itself was boosting this energy, and that the plasma vortex was literally interacting with the energies moving across the earth.
It takes 50 years for science to kind of trickle down into the average person's consciousness and their store of knowledge. And he said, we don't have that long. We can't wait 50 years for this information. That was part of the reason he wanted me to write about what he was discovering. I said to him at that point, so where are you at with these crop circles? And he said, well, let's talk about UFOs. And I was like, what? Don't tell me you're dealing with UFOs. And he said, oh yeah. He said there's a lot of similarities between what is going on in a crop circle and what's going on in a landing site where a UFO has been. He was having a great deal of difficulty getting published because the establishment blacklisted him, and we didn't know why. We didn't really even care why. And so I entered into a mentorship with him that started in, maybe 2001, 2000, something like that. And we met every week, sometimes a couple times a week, for 2, 3, 4 hours. And he was an excellent teacher. He was methodical, he was organized. He started right from the beginning with the whole story of crop circles. It was an amazing story. It was a mystery story. And the more I learned, the more amazed I was.
I couldn't leave the farm for 3 weeks. Every morning, I'd show up for coffee and I'd have my hands on my head and say, okay, I'm ready, tell me again. It took me days and days to really get the fact that crop circles are coming out of the earth. They're not coming out of the sky.
There was something very unusual going on. And he proceeded from there to discover that the nodes on a plant usually grows maybe 5 or 6 inches, and then it builds a node, which is a strengthening spot on the stem. If you're going to get a stalk of wheat that's 30, 36 inches high, it's got to have some reinforcement, and so it does that by building these nodes. And he noticed that some of the samples from the crop circles that he was getting in the lab had these greatly expanded nodes. They were elongated. And then he started getting some that the node was blown wide open. And his response at that point was, what happened? What happened here? He eventually figured out that when the plant was hit by crop circle energies, the liquid inside the plant began to boil. It created a head of steam and it blew out the node. And so he was aware at that point there must be heat involved. And he did some experiments with microwaves, and he said, I think it might even be microwaves, but he didn't know, and he refused to say. And then he found some plants that had just a single row of cells that had expanded cell wall pits. A cell wall pit is like a little mouth. So let's just back up a minute. A leaf, on the bottom of the leaf, has all these little cell wall pits. They're called stoma, and they're like mouths. And so typically in the morning when the dew is still on the plant, the birds wake up, and at dawn they begin to sing. When those plants hear birdsong, that frequency of birdsong, that frequency opens their mouths, and they drink in the dew. And when the birds are quiet later on in the morning, the sun comes up and it gets hot and the dew dries out, the mouths close. Well, this single row of cell wall pits would not close. Plants are made of cellulose, and cellulose is plastic. And so it was clear that this plastic had expanded. It had kind of melted open, kind of like a droop in the side of the mouth, and then cooled and stayed there. And he said there's just no technology, there's no energy, there's no technique, there's nothing that we know of that can affect one row of cells and leave all the rest around it intact.
In 2007, I was there for 9 weeks in southern England, in the epicenter, which is called Wiltshire. In 2008, I went back again for 9 weeks and stayed right there in the middle of all the activities, so that every morning when I'd wake up, I'd barely step out of my B&B room and go right to the research center called the Silent Circle. And they had a direct communication with the helicopter pilots, the microlight pilots, and they would always know firsthand when there was a new crop circle. So we would start our days in England at the research center, the Silent Circle, and then we'd cavalcade out and find these formations in the middle of absolute farm fields in the middle of nowhere.
What he was discovering with these materials from UFO sites was that they had the same kinds of characteristics as some of the seeds from the crop circles. One of the things that happened with crop circles was that he got the seeds in and they were all shriveled up. They looked like, he said, no seedsman would have even given them a second glance. He ended up saying, well, you know, this research is not complete if I don't at least try to germinate them. So he took 30 seeds from the crop circle, put it in germination paper, put it in the germination chamber. Took 30 seeds that were from outside the crop circle, put that in germination paper, put that in same time. And a couple days later, he looks in there and he said, my God, the seeds from the crop circle formation, from inside the formation, had grown like gangbusters. They had a bigger root mass. They were outperforming the seeds from outside the crop formation, hands down. So, so then he started experimenting with seeds, and he had discovered that he could put seeds on an aluminum plate, create what's called an ion-electron avalanche, which is a pulse of energy hitting those seeds. And if he tried to germinate them right away, nothing happened. So when he first was doing this experiment, he said, well, I guess I got the results I expected. So he put the seeds aside and didn't try to do anything with the rest of the seeds that had gotten this ion-electron avalanche energy. About 2 months later, he was cleaning the lab, and he was going to throw those seeds away, and he said this little voice, he always talked about this little voice and some dreams that he used that gave him clues as to where to go next. But this little voice said, don't throw those seeds out. So he decided, what the heck? He put them in the germination chamber, and he said that there was no comparison. The seeds that he had hit were something like 60% taller, had a bigger root mass, just all kinds of things. They just outperformed regular seeds hands down. eventually he figured it out. The seed is a little package of life. It's a living system. So when it gets hit with this tremendous avalanche of ions, which are charge, those are electromagnetic charges and particles carrying charges, the seed is damaged. And what it does for the next 4 to 6 weeks is spend all of its time and all of its energy just completely revamping its chemical and energetic system. It produces proanthocyanidins and all kinds of other things that would boost that seed's capacity to germinate no matter what's happening, whether it's too cold, too wet, too hot, too dry, just not good, too moldy, bacteria, disease, all kinds of stuff. The soil's not right. And what he discovered was that the capacity of these seeds, if you let them grow out, was that they produced anywhere from 30 to 400% more crop. We had at one point some UFO samples from Pennsylvania. It was a bunch of leaves that had turned red, mostly from lack of nitrogen, because the energies would prevent the uptake of nitrogen. But the leaves were full of these absolutely square holes, like something like a square pebble had gone through, like hundreds of square pebbles had gone through the leaves. And the leaves were not torn, they just had these square holes in them. That is something that really can't be faked.
These laboratory notebooks here represent the work that Dr. Levengood did during his entire life, from the 1950s, beginning in the 1950s. I believe this G7 began in the late 1950s, all the way through until the present. And there are probably 20,000, maybe 30,000 pages here. The implications for medicine, agriculture, and other areas of science is great, because the research that Dr. Levengood did had great implications in these areas, especially in relation to energy medicine, the treatment of disorders using energy methods, as well as the enhancement of agricultural production and growth through the use of electromagnetic and other energy methods for the treatment of seeds and plants.
He started college, he went all the way through, finished his PhD coursework, and got to the point where he was, I believe he had to defend his thesis. And I don't know what the thesis was, but he had a committee, and there were 3 people on the committee. Right at the very end, one of his committee members moved away and said, "I can't do this, you're going to have to find somebody else." He ended up replacing, or somebody replaced the guy who left with somebody that really didn't like Levengood at all. He was in a neighboring field of science. He proceeded to attack Lefty during the defense of this thesis, and I believe Lefty had a serious problem with his speech. He would get tongue-tied when he got really excited or really upset. And he had conquered most of that, but I think that's why he liked science, was because he didn't have a lot of social confidence and a lot of social graces. And science allowed him to, do his own thing and work in the lab and all of that. So the man who replaced the guy who left on his committee disliked Levengood seriously. And this guy had been working on some kind of physics problem, biology problem, whatever it was, for many, many years, and had not been able to resolve this question. And they told him he was not going to get his PhD unless he figured that out. He took that on, and he said for the next 6 weeks or so, he didn't eat, he didn't sleep, maybe it was a couple months. He lost 30 pounds. He did everything he knew. He said it was the biggest challenge of his entire life to that point. He started looking at math formulas, and he found a formula, plugged in all the variables, and voila, it worked, and he had an answer. And he took it back to his committee, and the man who had given him this challenge was so upset that he went on the attack right there. And I think he didn't expect Levengood to be able to resolve the issue. And he was upset that Levengood did, because now Levengood had to be given credit for what he wanted to be known for. So he went on the attack, and it escalated, and he couldn't speak. And they said to him, speak, or we can't give you the PhD. We can't grant you the paper. And he couldn't speak. And he left. He said later it was the only time in his life he came close to committing suicide. And he said finally he just scraped his dignity back into a pile and said, you know, okay, I've been through the whole program. I know the material. I have the information. I'm just going to go to work. Maybe somebody needs what I know. And he was hired immediately. He worked at a number of universities in different departments, and for a number of seed companies. He did research for seed companies. In other words, what he realized was you didn't have to have the number or the letters after your name, the PhD after your name. What you had to have was the knowledge and the skill. And I think the fact that they didn't give him the PhD, he never went back to try again. His attitude was kind of, well, the hell with it. I've got the knowledge, I've got the skills, that's what I need to make a living. He's one of the few people to have written 8 full-length articles for Nature magazine. And I think he had some in science. He published in over 40 different journals. And his work was so extraordinary that he was invited by the National Science Foundation to come to Washington, D.C. and present his work on the atomic structure of glass. And he was reading the fine print, and he noticed that it said, you must have a PhD. And he wrote back, and he was very sad. He said, so disappointed that he wrote and he said, I'm sorry, I don't have a PhD. I went through the program. You know, there was a problem with my committee. I didn't get the letters after my name. The National Science Foundation wrote back and said, we don't care about the letters after your name. It is, you have to have either a PhD or the educational and scientific equivalent. That's what makes you a doctor. We would recognize you as a doctor. And so he decided after some struggling that he would never put PhD after his name. However, he would use the term doctor, Dr. William Levengood. It's really important to understand what plasma makes possible. You can, for instance, just use these energies to create water out of thin air. That solves the entire water shortage that we're having, and the fact that we have ruined all of our lakes and our rivers, and we don't have fresh water anymore, hardly anywhere. We could use this the plasma has been used to create food, and the food is imprinted with high-density nutrition. It's everything you need. There are other factors. You can create clean air. We could clean up the Pacific Ocean of all the radiation in a minute. Well, we'll say a day. It would take more time to get set up than it would to do it. We can eliminate war. we are eliminating the need for oil, and that is creating some difficulties for the oil dinosaurs. But in a world where we have access to plasma energies, we have access to an unlimited ability to create whatever we need. There's no need for us to be hungry or cold or, impoverished anymore. Plasma is the basis of all matter. Plasma is the basis of I think, the new energy form. If you get a new energy at the base of your society, you have a new society. Oil was at the base of the last one. Plasma will be at the base of the next one.
We're sitting at the research center, the Silent Circle, on a nice early crisp morning. And we watched these two guys fall out of their van, literally fall to the ground, both of them, out different doors. And they kind of crawled to the research center. They weren't really looking up. And I started to get this maternal sense that I better get up and see if they need some help because they didn't look well. So I went up and I said, "Hi, you okay?" And they both barely looked up into my eyes, and he said, "Oh, what we saw last night." That's the right thing to say to me. So I said, "Well, please come join us." These guys said that they were sitting up on the overlook, and what we do for night watch is we go up on the same particular hills that are on top of the fields that get hit year after year after year with crop circles. So there's usually a few of us with cameras set up. We've got infrared, all kinds of night watch gear, and we sit up there for hours and hours and hours. And it's cold and it's rainy, and we're just determined that we are going to meet those balls of light and that we are going to be the ones to hit play on the camera and get some fresh footage. These guys happened to be up on the hill. They were determined, and they didn't see anything. So they went back to their camper and were falling asleep. And they heard this raging sound from down the hill, and it was French people that had just seen these big, bright red balls of light. So they got out of their camper van, they put their clothes back on, and they ran down the hill, and they met the French people.
When I saw it, I was trying to find rational explanations for it. So that's why I started to think, well, maybe people aren't yet ready for the truth.
We definitely saw them, no doubt. What they are, we don't know, but we saw them.
All of a sudden, there were like arms and legs coming out of the lightning bolt. So still illuminating, kind of humanoid shape, but in light form. My eyes don't lie. No. It's just my rational mind that tries to find a rational explanation.
So I went back to the research center, and these guys crawled back to their car and left. When I told the owner of the research center that I had just recorded this interview, he said, "My friend in England, who was up on Silbury Hill across the field, who also saw the orange balls of light and the illumined light beings." He connected us through Skype, through email, through telephone. For the entire time, as soon as I got back to America, that I kept trying to reach her, she wouldn't pick up anything. She wouldn't speak to me. She wouldn't communicate. I was really disappointed because I thought, that's a pretty heavy story, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. So the movie was incredible, and I finished it. It's called Orbs and Light Beings, and I completed it, locked it, sent it off to be printed, and the very next day, this girl calls me from England and says, "I'm ready to talk."
Scotland, Ireland, Italy, Egypt, Fiji, Japan for sure. So many lands I long to know.
I finished the movie and sent it out to all the people that were in it, and I get this really interesting call from Igor in Belgium. He thanked me immensely for sending him the film, and he said, "My family, all they could do was laugh the first time because they could tell I was in shock, I wasn't speaking well, I was staring at the ground, my face was red," and he just kept thanking me on the phone. "Thank you for documenting the most incredible day of my life." And I said, well, my pleasure. It's pretty incredible what you saw. He said, but I didn't remember the dream until I watched the movie. Thank you so much. And I said, what dream? He said, well, it was right after you woke me up at the camper van. And I said, Igor, I met you at the research center. I didn't wake you up at your van. No, you came and woke me up at the van right before the dream. Well, I knew it wasn't true, but I said, okay, tell me about the dream. So he said they showed me how they go in and out of the world, the circle makers. He said, do you know those whirling dervishes? He said they put their arms up and they start to spin really fast, and then they disappeared. That's how they disappeared that night, and I wouldn't have remembered until I had seen the movie. As soon as the movie was done, I get a call from the girl in England who says, I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you. Please read between the lines. I have 3 children. I couldn't go on camera. I understood. She said, I went up on the hill, on Silbury Hill, with my partner and a friend. And there was a group of teenagers behind us drinking, and they were obnoxious, kind of drunk and noisy. And the 3 of us were standing at the face of the hill looking at East Field. She said, I've seen the balls of light before, and when they dropped out of the mist that all of a sudden came over the field, she looked over her shoulder and she said, the teenagers were silent. And there was the strangest black plastic tarp-looking substance that had covered them completely. They were laid out. They were silent. They were basically made unconscious. She said all of a sudden, the whole base of Silbury Hill was filled with these little light beings that were walking around the base. She knew nothing about what we knew, and she said the whole base was full of these little light beings, and all of a sudden, they all raised their arms and started to spin. You know, like those whirling dervishes, Patty? And I was like, oh my God, you are not saying this to me. And she said, yeah, they started to spin, and then they all disappeared.
He brought it down to this principle that there are some energies out there, and he didn't know what at the time, that boost the growth capacity of plants and of living systems. So when he got these crop circle materials in and studied those, and then he got the UFO materials in and studied those, what he began to see was that there was this correspondence with the work that he was doing with ion-electron avalanche processes with seeds, and it started to come together. He did share some of the very unusual phenomena, and he said to me, there's no way a Doug or a Dave or somebody could fake the crop circle phenomena. There's no way you can, you know, just bend a whole field. You can melt the cellulose in a whole field and make those plants bend over the way they do, and then keep growing, because there really isn't any damage. It's just that the cellulose bends over. There's no way that you could fake elongated nodes, or what he called expulsion cavities when the node blew out. There's no way that you could fake a single row of seeds. There's no way to fake molten iron ore in the middle of the field, you know, in the middle of the night. And he said most of the crop circles are real. The ones that are not, that are done by Doug and Dave type, he said those are obvious. He didn't even spend any time on them. They were all broken, the plant was dying, etc. He gets a sample into the lab, and the leaves looked like they were covered with this reddish-brown stuff. And he looked at it, he turned it over, he's studying it, and then he decides to see if he can pull the leaf off of this reddish-brown stuff, and he did. And to his utter amazement, there were all of the leaf fibers molded right into that reddish brown substance, which turned out to be iron ore. And if it was obvious that that iron ore had to be molten in order to have conformed to that leaf and been molded the way that it did. And the great mystery was iron ore does not become molten until it's 1200 degrees centigrade. So the question was, how could molten iron ore be floating around in a field in thin air in the middle of the night? And, you know, where did that come from? And so that was part of the mystery. So the UFO materials, or materials from UFO sites, had the same characteristics. They were growing like gangbusters. If it was a tree, the trees were amazing. The tree rings would sometimes be, the tree would put on a half an inch between rings each year. Other rings outside that circle where the UFO had landed, the rings were right on top of one another. You could barely differentiate the various, you know, the growth from year to year.
Mary Rodwell, who's one of the famous regression therapists working with contactees of extraterrestrial contact, she helps people realize where they went, where they were taken, and what was done if it's a successful regression. So my gentleman friend had my camera rolling. We did a 3-hour regression. I didn't even have to look at the footage. I remembered everything when she took me there. So where I was taken was underwater, and the colors were like nothing I've ever seen. It was the most exquisite ultraviolet, ultra pink, ultra turquoise, ultra blue, and everything moved so beautifully with the sunlight coming through the water. And I remembered moving through the water, but I never saw the craft I was in, the beings that were with me. All I knew was that my field, my soul, was moving through space underwater in the most gorgeous, colorful place I've ever been this lifetime. And then there we were. There were these lathed pillars of these incredible colors, and they were the entrance to this huge open room which my body was being moved into out of the craft. And I wasn't walking, I wasn't swimming, I was breathing underwater. So I don't know how that was happening, but nothing was difficult, and I was being moved into the center of this big, huge, gorgeous room, and these lathed pillars were everywhere around the sides. And I realized when they finally brought me back, and we were moving away from this place, that it was a crystal castle. 2 years later, in 2012, a friend came up to the house who was also a contactee, and she said, "There's this artist, I have to share his work with you. His name is Ariel Ali, and I think you'll love his work." So she opens up her computer, and as soon as I saw the first photo, I started to shake. I started to cry. I had chills. She looked at me and she's like, "What's going on with you?" And I said, "I've been here. Who is this artist? Where is this place? Oh my God, this is where they took me." So I woke up the next morning at my house on the lake, and I was really excited to call this man Ariel. I opened up my computer and I realized I had a new email from the Crop Circle Connector. It's a membership I have that if there's ever a new crop circle anywhere in the world, I get photos first thing in the morning. Comments, measurements, all the information about the particular crop circles that happen. And there was a new crop circle that day. I opened my email and unfriggin' believable. The circle makers delivered the Crystal Castle crop circle.
It's as if you can read my mind. It's as
It was the same castle that was the Crystal Castle when I had my experience. When I realized that the circle makers had created this castle while I was sleeping, I remember it was 10:30 at night, which is 5:30 in the morning in England. Now the circle makers have basically 3 hours of night darkness in the summer to deliver and put down these crop circles. 5:30 was prime time. So I believed that night that the circle makers were actually acknowledging my memory. Obviously, it's the Crystal Castle.
It's as if you can read my mind.
It had 5 drops of water underneath. 5 drops of water, not circles. And I looked at all the crop circles of the summer before that one came down. Every single one had a circle, except the Crystal Castle. It was rectangle stars, drips of water. There was not a circle in sight. It was an exception of the summer, and I just took it personally. And I said, don't tell anyone. It's just going to sound like you're making this stuff up. The very next day, the circle makers came back and put a huge circle on top of the Crystal Castle, and they stuck a goddess inside. And it just got me to go in deeper and deeper into this research.
Patty's experience with the Crystal Castle is really powerful in that it's a signal from the universe that she's on track. Whatever she used to be doing is not her path anymore. What happens when you begin to open to consciousness and truth, your own truth, is that you have to follow your heart. You have to follow your passion. If you follow that passion, then you will be filled with every kind of good thing, all kinds of successes, etc. And it's almost like the universe is rubber stamping your path. You have to do what you came here to do. And everything begins to flow like that when you're on track. And so it's a pretty good indication that Patty's on track.
A few years ago, I was speaking at the International UFO Congress Convention, and I met a man named Richard. And he said, I have a gift I'd really like to send you. And I didn't know him, so I didn't give him my address. But when I met him the following year, and he said the same thing, I still have a gift I really want to send you. I felt kind of bad because everybody knew him. He was a great guy. So I gave him my address. And as soon as I got home, I received a gift that completely blew my socks off. Richard sent me a denim jacket with huge embroidered crop circle on the back, but out of 30,000 crop circles in the world, he sent me Sugar Hill 2007 on the back of my denim jacket. This particular crop circle is the formation where I had a contact experience in 2007 that changed the course of my life forever.
In the field of consciousness, there are these beautifully coordinated moments that are almost like a dance. And the story of Patty's jacket really is a story of that kind of dance happening. You know, somebody's just doing what they feel guided to do. And when they do it, it's like a vote, or it's like a gift. It's like an encouragement that says, keep going. You're going in the right direction. And consciousness operates like that all the time. Are we paying attention? No, not very often, but it still happens, and it's a beautiful example of the kind of what I think of as long-distance telepathy happening between individuals who support something that you're doing and who show up magically at just the right moment to make something happen, or to ease something, or to give you a piece of information you need, or open a door. Those are the kinds of magical moments that really make life wonderful. Consciousness is a fabulous, fabulous thing.
These crop circles have given us so much information about corruption, about advanced technologies. In 2009, it was all pictures of birds, fish, bugs, and they had not only the ones that we see now, but the most ancient thunderbird, rising phoenix, and sure enough, 8 months later, the BP oil spill happened.
In 2001, 2 crop formations appeared near the Chilbolton radio telescope in Hampshire, England. Both were very precise and had a number of small pixels, one clearly offering a binary code pattern. A binary code is made up of zeros and ones and can be read by translating lines and spaces into decimals, which then correspond to letters. They are easily understood by computers and experts in the field. One of the formations looked like an eerie human face. The other is one of the most controversial crop circles ever, because it closely resembles a transmission that was sent into deep space in 1974. The transmission was federally funded by a government agency called SETI, or Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The content of the message was designed by Carl Sagan and Frank Drake. It provided basic information about human life on Earth, such as which planet we live on, what we generally look like, how tall we are, our population, the kind of telescope we used, the chemical building blocks of our genetics, and the spiral structure of our DNA. It was broadcast with 1 trillion watts from the world's largest radio telescope, called the Arecibo Tower in Puerto Rico. The message was beamed into space toward a star cluster called M13, which is 23,000 light-years away and consisted of 300,000 stars. The Chilbolton Formation made crop circle history when it seemed to be a direct response to the message sent in 1974, but it returned with some distinct changes in the binary pattern. Their response seemed to show smaller bodies with larger heads. It showed a different alignment of the planets. Their response also differed by mentioning the crystalline structure of silicon. This could be one of the most significant indicators of two-way ET contact yet. The following year, England received another amazing double formation in a field, the alien face and the disk. It was similar to Chilbolton having a binary code formation and a face, plus they were both located near radio broadcasting masts. Anybody listening? The circular grid contained a binary data sequence. It was read by experts and deciphered as this: beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe, there is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing.
I was back in England. There was this amazing formation in Avebury Manor. People were reading in all kinds of very heavy information into this formation. And it must have been full of important information because the very next day, the farmer was instructed, or he decided himself, to destroy the field. So he took his tractor and he plowed 3 big white stripes through the field that morning, which, you know, I was really glad I flew over the day before and did filming. And what did the circle makers do? They came back that night, blasted this field with all these new formations that kind of looked like squiggles when I saw the photo from the air, but walking through the field, oh my God, every element of this system of stars and planets and moons and suns, every single piece of this formation that was added, every element was magnificent on the ground. And there was this one which had a bouquet in the middle and a living flower sticking up in the center of this amazing formation. And it was called Avebury Manor. I was so intrigued by the additional elements that that evening I said to my friend from Holland, let's go back in the circle. She said, it's night. And I said, yeah, let's do it. So we went into the formation and I said, ooh, look, there's a shortcut. And she goes, I'm not taking a shortcut into that farm field. So I said, I'll see you in the middle. So I head down this place where no other humans had walked. It looked like a track going into the field. And as soon as I got to the center, it was beautiful twilight, and I was standing there with my arms out, and all of a sudden I realized there was something moving on me. And I looked down at my black lace skirt, and it had huge white polka dots everywhere. I had on this short skirt, blue sandals, and a sleeveless crappie top. And I look at my crappie top, and it also had these big, huge white polka dots. And as I'm looking, like, what the heck is on me? You know, cotton balls? One of them started crawling toward my face. And I realized that I was covered in absolutely enormous white spiders. I slowly took my skirt off, and I laid it on the ground, and I watched these white things crawl away back into the wheat. Took my shirt off, which was horrific because it was covered with them, and I had to take it over my head. So I pulled it up, and none of them got on me, none of them bit me, none of them had any intention of hurting me or scaring me. And somehow, with my standing there in my underwear, I watched all these little whites in the twilight go off into the wheat. And I thought for sure they were just spiders, just white tarantulas or something. So I went home and I hit the internet and I said, what are these white spiders? What are these giant white things crawling all over? There was nothing. I got back to America when I was making these movies. I went in on the internet again. I couldn't find a thing. And I realized that maybe they weren't spiders at all.
Intuitively, I don't think those were spiders. And we had a number of reports from people who went into crop circles and had enormous physiological changes that happened. One of the most remarkable was a group of 3 women who went into a crop circle. They were from Washington and Oregon, came home. These were women in their 70s. They began menstruating again, and their husbands were complaining that they couldn't get anything done because the women wanted to spend all day in bed. So there's a youthening effect that I think goes with the right energies, which is something that we could learn to experiment with. I think plasma has something to do with the aging or the failure to age. When you have fields, relational fields, magnetic gravitational fields that maintain your matter and you keep those energies high, then your matter is going to be maintained, and therefore you will live long and well.
The conclusion to all of this research is that if everything is made of plasma, and we can learn how to manipulate plasma, plasma is used to create or destroy matter. So it puts us in a whole new paradigm that has an entirely different scientific basis. It has an entirely different belief system to it. It calls for an entirely new educational system. It calls for a new way of doing food and money and even self-governance that takes into account our role in the universe and the other beings that are out there waiting for us to get our bricks in a pile kind of thing. We cannot be violent or we will not be welcome. It just comes down to that. So the great value of plasma, the great value of the messages from the crop circles and the UFO materials and the bovine excisions and all the research that we did with plasma and consciousness showing that plasma responds to consciousness, all of that really comes down to this is the next step in the paradigm shift.
Crop circles are coming out of the earth. They're not coming out of the sky. These spinning plasma vortices are made up of different frequencies with distinct boundary conditions. All of them initially come out of the earth, and periodically human consciousness is involved. Sometimes we also include the frequencies of other dimensional beings from distant planets. Almost all crop circles have been located over an aquifer of water, as well as sitting on a ley line between two sacred sites. So high spiritual energy and water are part of the equation as well, producing crop circles. All frequencies carry information, and all plasma communicates. Crop circles are created by counter-rotating vortices that arise due to the interaction between energy frequencies flowing through the Earth and moving through the atmosphere. They meet, they interact, and the result is a visible energetic picture of the information that they carry.
Levengood, for 40 years, ate the same food every day, one meal a day. Spaghetti that he made himself with some kind of tomatoes on it and salad. He said he'd make 10 days worth, he'd eat it, he'd make another 10 days worth. That was his diet for his entire life, for probably 50 years. I said to him, "How are you going to stay healthy?" He said, "I'm healthy. I'm fine." He said, I told them," he's kind of waving his hands up like he's talking to the universe, "don't bother me about food if you want me to do what I came here to do."